Hello and welcome to Free Expression from the Wall Street Journal with me, Gerry Baker. I'm editor-at-large of the Journal. Thanks very much indeed for joining us. Please do subscribe wherever you do your podcast listening. Leave us a nice review and give us a like. It helps, obviously, with the circulation of the podcast. I'm coming to you in sound and vision this week for the first time. It's a great pleasure. Pleasure for me, maybe less of a pleasure for those of you who have to view me.
From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Free Expression with Gerry Baker.
It's been obviously a traumatic week in America. We've had the assassination last week of Charlie Kirk, the conservative activist and communicator, shall we say, in Utah. A shocking event, perhaps. A disturbing step up or down, depending on how you view it, in the cycle of political violence that the country seems to have been going through over the last decade or so. Attempted assassination of President Trump last year, attacks on Democratic lawmakers murder of Democratic lawmakers in Minnesota. This seems to be, unfortunately, something that does seem to be escalating. It's tragic. It's particularly tragic, I think, the murder of Charlie Kirk, because whether you liked him or disliked him or agreed with him or disagreed with him, Kirk was doing something that I think in this increasingly polarized and partisan society that we have was doing something important, which was going out and talking to people and persuading. Again, you may not have liked his style and the things he said were perhaps objectionable to some people, but he was at least engaging, and he made a point of going out and engaging with people who disagreed with him, trying to persuade them to his view, and he was obviously incredibly successful. He was an extremely influential figure in tackling the kind of left-wing progressive hegemony that controlled so many of our university campuses. My sense from talking to people who knew him, I didn't, but people who were influenced by him, was that he kind of gave young people the liberty, the opportunity, the permission, if you like, to challenge these dominant progressive views, and was very influential as a result. And his loss is a tragedy, and as I say, a worrying further step down into this vortex of violence that we seem to be in. I'm not planning to talk about that in too much detail. There's been a lot covered. I wrote my column this week about what I view as the kind of horror, the corruption of the human soul that we're seeing through so much that happens online and social media, that we've seen not only the images and commentary on the murder itself, but then the typical, and I'm afraid all too familiar, descent into name-calling, blame assigning, all the familiar things that we're used to, all done in a particularly toxic environment. I find this a particularly dark and disturbing aspect of our modern political culture. I'm not going to talk about that or about my column, but I'm pleased to have the opportunity to speak with someone I've got to know quite well over the last couple of years, in the spirit of Charlie Kirk, if you like, someone who is on the opposite side of the political viewpoint from the Wall Street Journal editorial page. We hold to pretty conservative ideals here, and I think it's important that we engage with people who hold different views, people who are willing to argue and to persuade, and who are willing to be persuaded. So I'm delighted this week to be joining us, by someone I've known and admired for some time. That's Congressman Seth Moulton, Democratic congressman from Massachusetts. So had a long and distinguished career. Of course, those of you who know him, he served in the military, serving on active duty in Iraq. He became a member of Congress, Democratic member of Congress in Massachusetts, and has been a force that's spokesman, I think, for if you like, what we might call the kind of the more centrist, the moderate wing of the Democratic Party in his time in Congress. And he continues to be an important voice of reason. As I say, we disagree on a lot of things, but I'm looking forward to having a conversation with a leading Democrat about the state of the country, the state of the Democratic Party and what we need to do to move beyond these difficult times that we're in. So Seth Moulton joins me now. Congressman, thanks very much indeed for joining Free Expression.
Gerry, good to see you. Thanks for having me.
So I want to talk obviously about particularly the Democratic Party, what's going on in the Democratic Party, what it needs to do to recover some of the lost ground, what some of the arguments are. And you've been an important voice in that debate already and will grow more important, I'm sure. As I said in my introduction, obviously this has been a traumatic and tumultuous week again in America with the murder of Charlie Kirk. And what we're seeing to some extent in its aftermath. I just wanted to get your thoughts, first of all, your reflections on obviously not only the shocking event, the murder itself, but what it tells us about where we are in this country right now, and also, what you've seen since then, how you view the reaction from political leaders and others. Just give us a sense of what you've been thinking.
Well, obviously, the murder is horrific. And usually in the wake of a tragedy like this, it's an opportunity for people to come together, for Democrats and Republicans to unite and say, we've got to condemn this violence. We've got to stop this from happening and make a serious examination of where it's coming from and what we can do. Unfortunately, that's not been entirely the reaction that we've heard. From political leaders across the country. On the Democratic side, I think you've heard a lot call for a reduction in violence, for tamping down the rhetoric, condemning what's happened. And you've also heard that from some prominent Republicans. Speaker Johnson, for example, has been very clear that this is not a time for pointing the finger, for politicizing what happened. It's a time for us to come together and make sure this doesn't happen again. But unfortunately, there have been prominent Republicans, including the president, who have been pointing fingers and trying to politicize this. The president has announced he's going to go on a crusade against Democratic groups that have no known connection to this violence whatsoever. And of course, this is the same president who, in the wake of the biggest event of political violence in the nation's recent history, the attack on the Capitol of January 6th, chose to just pardon all those lawbreakers who set out to kill cops, to kill Nancy Pelosi, to kill the Vice President of the United States. So that's not what we need. We need people to bring us together. We need someone like, to cite some other Republicans, what George W. Bush did after 9/11. I mean, a tragedy on a scale that Americans could not even imagine. And of course, people were so upset. There were many who just wanted immediate retribution. And yet George W. Bush called us to rise above that, to not just go after Muslims because it seemed that Islamic terrorists were responsible for the attacks, to not just hate fellow Americans who disagreed with us. And, that's really the kind of leadership that we need in this moment.
I take your point about violence on both sides, and I listen with some dismay to the president himself and to, Attorney General Pam Bondi talking about going after, progressive, liberal, whatever you want to call them, groups, left-wing groups, radicals, concerned about what exactly that might involve. And you're absolutely right. Of course, we've seen violence on both sides, but is there a problem on the left? I mean, is there a problem of radicalization of some people on the left? We've seen a number of these incidents, and again, I stress as we record this on Tuesday morning, we still don't actually have absolute confirmation of the motive of the suspect in the killing of Charlie Kirk, although the evidence does seem to be quite suggestive that it was a politically motivated thing. And we had the terrible shooting at the Catholic school in Minnesota. We've had, other attacks. Is there a sense in which the I don't mean Democrats, I mean the left, perhaps more generally, the radical left, somehow is perhaps being told that Donald Trump is fascist and that the Republicans are taking away people's rights and they're sort of trying to destroy democracy. Has that, do you think, fed this radicalization? Is there a problem, frankly, with some people who some very prominent critics of Donald Trump who are somehow, through their rhetoric, perhaps radicalizing and actually encouraging people to go out and commit acts of violence?
I mean, that's certainly a story from the right. It's interesting in the episodes that you mentioned just now, you didn't even ask about the Minnesota lawmakers, the sitting Democrats who were assassinated by MAGA extremists. And of course, the president didn't ask if there was a problem on the right. The president didn't even bother to lower the nation's flags when these innocent people were killed, tried to be killed in their homes. And I mean, the statistics are actually very clear that there's more of a problem with political violence on the right than the left. But as a Democrat, Gerry, I am not afraid to stand here and condemn whatever violence is coming from the left. I just wish I could hear that from Republicans on the other side. I wish that even people like you would just say, I mean, in the wake of Minnesota, is there a problem with MAGA extremists trying to kill Democrats? And does the rhetoric that we're hearing from people like Jesse Waters on Fox, or the president in the Oval Office, or J.D. Vance when he hosted Charlie Kirk's podcast, is that rhetoric contributing to this? And there are a lot of polls after January 6th, for example. There's a December 2021 poll where it said 40% of Republicans said, quote, violence against government is sometimes justified. Only 23% of Democrats agreed. 33% of Republicans agree with the statement that true American patriots may have to resort to violence to save the country. Only 13% of Democrats agree with that. So if we're going to honestly admit that there are problems on both sides, we have to be willing on both sides to actually go after our own base, to police our own. That's where this should start if we're going to tamp things down. And while I'm a Democrat, unafraid to say that, yes, we need to stop violence on the left, I sure wish I would hear from some Republicans who would take on violence and incitement to violence on the right.
I mean, since you asked, I will respond and say 100%. I totally condemn. I think this is a both sides. I think, frankly, that I hate this phenomenon of both sides. Because it actually, in the end, it's sort of, it somehow is used to, if not justify, then at least to kind of somehow to lower the moral turpitude of people who do these things when people say both sides. But I think there is, I do think there's a problem on both sides. I think that's extremely clear. I didn't mention the terrible murder of the Minnesota state representative's senator because I was saying I think it is a problem on both sides, and I was talking to you particularly as a Democrat, but I think it is absolutely. I think it's a problem. I don't think any of my colleagues on the Wall Street Journal editorial page have been any doubt about that. We've spoken, we've written about this, and I have certainly condemned on both sides. I think it is. I think there absolutely is a problem on both sides. I do wonder whether there is a particular. Again, whether we saw the assassination attempts on Donald Trump last year, whether there is something, and there is something about the way in which people talk about what Trump is doing that actually creates this mood among a tiny fraction here. And again, we need to be careful what we're talking about. We're not talking about mainstream Democrats and members of Congress or people like you, but whether or not there is this is kind of ginning up the sense of a country facing an existential crisis. And when a country faces an existential crisis, people do extreme things. And I wonder whether just some of that rhetoric from some on the left is contributing to that.
Well, you preface your question by talking about the two assassination attempts really on the president. One was a registered Republican who expressed anti-immigrant views, and a lot of things aligned with the president. We don't really know why. This is the one who was killed, so we don't really know what his motives were. The other was an independent who had no clear connection to the left whatsoever, but also no clear connection to the right. So I guess the question I have is why, in the wake of this violence, whether it's in the wake of the assassinations in Minnesota or the murder of Charlie Kirk, are Republicans unwilling to ask this question if there's a problem on the right?
No, I think it's again. I think it's a completely legitimate question. And again, you mentioned, you talked about January 6th. Not only was January 6th an appalling act of political violence on the right, it was one that whose perpetrators the president then pardoned, as you said, including people who committed terrible acts of violence. So look, I think you and I are not fundamentally disagreeing here. I think this problem of political violence is on both sides, and I suppose my question is, well, how do we de-escalate it, Congressman?
Both sides actually need to condemn it. You can't have one side condemning it. I mean, is there an elected Democrat in the last week who has just said, we need retribution, we need to go after these people, we will what's about to be unleashed is something never seen before? I mean, this is just some of the rhetoric that we've heard from the right. I mean, I don't think I don't believe, I could be wrong, but I don't believe there's a single prominent elected Democrat who's done anything except just condemn the violence.
I mean, I get it. So I interrupt again. I hate doing this both sides moral relativism thing, but it was true that the Biden administration did repeatedly call out, say that right-wing terrorism was the greatest threat facing the country.
Well, that's what the FBI said.
Well, yeah, and then there was a lot of politicization, including, as you know, Congressman, people, traditional Catholics were identified as potential terrorists. So, I genuinely hate doing this because I don't think it gets us anywhere. If we say both sides,
but I mean, you asked a fair question, Gerry. You asked a fair question, and my answer is that if it's in your words a problem on both sides, even if statistically it might be more on the right than the left, but if it's a problem on both sides, then both sides need to condemn it. And so when you have Nancy Mace immediately just saying this is Democrats, when you have the president saying that he's going to use this as a political opportunity to dismantle Democratic nonprofits, which have no connection to this whatsoever, when you have Stephen Miller in the White House saying, I don't care how we're going to do this, but we're just going to go after these organizations. We're going to channel this anger. That doesn't help. That makes it worse. I mean, I could even argue that kind of rhetoric from some of the most prominent Republican leaders in the country not only incites their base, but may actually turn more Democrats against them as well. It may say there might be people on the left who say, well, if this is what they're saying on the right, then what we can do. I mean, that would be horrific. And again, I would be the first to say that needs to not happen. But it's really hard. I mean, it's like, I've got two little kids, right? And I can go to a playground and be really frustrated with the way that some other kids are behaving. But if my kids are off the wall, my job is to police my own first, right? And so I just wish that we could see this, that the rise of statesmanship and people behaving, like the John McCains and George W. Bushes of the past. I mean, look, a lot of things I didn't like about George W. Bush. I had to go fight in 4 tours in his Iraq War, which I was an outspoken critic of, right? But I'm not afraid to stand here and praise him for the way that he handled things after 9/11. And I just wish that we could see that kind of leadership today. And I do think you see it by and large from Democrats and from, again, some really important Republicans like Speaker Johnson. He's doing the right thing, like Spencer Cox, the governor of Utah. So we need that. That's the first step. And then I think the second thing is, like, let's just have an honest conversation about where this is coming from. There was a 2024 poll just last year by the Desert News in Utah that said that 46% of Utah Republicans said violence against the government can be justified. Now, only 19% of Utah Democrats said the same. But again, the question is, okay, so Utah, a very religious state, a very conservative state, a place that celebrates Christian values. You know how prominent the Mormon church is in Utah. I have a number of Mormon friends. This is not what I would expect from the state of Utah. So where is this coming from? Let's ask those serious questions, and let's be willing to ask them, especially of those on our own side, whichever whichever side that is. And then I think you also have to ask questions about just why is it that when someone feels that violence is the answer, it's just so easy to get a gun and take someone out. I mean, I think those are fair questions to ask. I mean, you come from a country with a lot less gun violence because there are a lot less guns. And, we can have that debate. I appreciate the fact that although I strongly disagree with many of the things that Charlie Kirk said, he was willing to engage in that debate, right? Like, let's have those debates, but let's do it honestly with the intention of genuinely saying this violence has to stop. This violence has to stop. There's nothing more un-American than saying, no, freedom of speech, we don't get freedom of speech. We just shoot you if we disagree.
I could not agree more. And again, just for the record, I have personally written condemning right-wing violence, condemned what happened on January 6th, condemned what happened in every instance of violence. And it is a problem. There's absolutely no question in my mind. And while I don't speak for the Wall Street Journal editorial page, I'm the commentator, and I know the Wall Street Journal editorial page has done the same thing. So just to be complete, I just want to, just on the record there, we have not stinted in our criticism of violence wherever it comes from.
No, and I bet you've gotten some harsh feedback for some of that.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
I mean, after my CNN interview last week, where I just said the president should do what George W. Bush is, and I consciously picked a fellow Republican to compare him to. We have received just heinous death threats from the right. Called into my office. We posted some of the voicemails on the internet, threatening not only me but my team, my wife, and my two little kids. And I just got a call from the principal of my kid's school because he's so worried about violence at their school. I'm so fortunate that the girls are too young to pick up on this or understand it. But the fact that, again, just trying to have a discussion about this, leads to these death threats it just shows how bad things are.
It does, and I'm extremely sorry to hear that. And it's appalling, and everybody, any decency just has to condemn it. And it does, unfortunately, just seem to be getting worse. But as you say, there are ways we all have to, if we're to move forward, we all have to not just verbally condemn it, but actually get out there and be strong in our condemnation of violence and all sides. Let's move on, Congressman, because we don't have a lot of time, and I do want to talk to you about a couple of other things. I want to talk to you about your view of where the Democratic Party is. Just very quickly, First, though, you're there in Washington right now, where once again yet another budget deadline is looming, with the prospect of yet another potential government shutdown. How do you see things at the moment? We've got these various appropriation bills. We've got this deadline of the end of the month. I know there's been debate. There's a very narrowly divided House, relatively narrowly divided Senate. There's been a lot. There was a lot of criticism of Chuck Schumer back earlier in the year when he actually moved to prevent a government shutdown. Give me your sense of where things stand right now, and what's likely to happen. Do you think we're going to get to the point where we're going to get a shutdown? What needs to be done to avert one?
Well, these are all important questions. This seems to happen all the time now. This chaos, and it feels very chaotic right now. It does not feel like there is a plan. The playbook, the standard playbook, is that there's a group of particularly conservative Republicans who will object to what the speaker wants to do to keep the government open. In a way, they're the most principled ones, right? They're the ones who are saying, "Oh, deficits still do matter. We shouldn't just be, dramatically expanding the deficit or even cutting healthcare from people." Ironically, as a Democrat, I love to work with Republicans across the aisle, and usually that means moderate Republicans. But the moderates tend to be quick to cave. The more conservatives tend to hold to their principles. But at the end of the day, they all give in. So that's what I ultimately expect to happen. I think that on the Democratic side of the aisle, Schumer is definitely under more pressure from the base to get something in return. I agree with that. I don't think we should just be giving in here. I think that if the Republicans, despite controlling every thing in government, the White House, the House, and the Senate, if they want our votes to bail them out because their own Republicans won't vote to keep government open, then we should get something in return. I mean, that's just common sense. I think what we're asking for in return right now is just good for all Americans, like the ability to make sure your healthcare premiums don't skyrocket. These are things that many Republicans, prominently Senator Josh Hawley, have said, this is important. People's healthcare costs are out of control. But in terms of exactly how it plays out, I should be able to tell you sitting here in Washington this week, and yet I can't, because there really isn't a plan. And it'll probably come together at the last minute. Usually what happens is we kind of, burn the midnight oil waiting for Johnson to get the votes together. And eventually at the end of the day, the Republicans put their principles aside and just vote to support the president.
It's an uncomfortable question to ask, but the politics of this, I mean, it does. We've seen this so many times now over the last 15 years, where usually it is often the Republicans who somehow seem to hold the responsibility for shutting down the government, and sort of it seems that every time Republicans threaten to do this, or it does occasionally actually happen, kind of Republicans get blamed. They don't, they don't, and it doesn't redound to their advantage politically. This time, is there a risk? Obviously, this is very much what was on Chuck Schumer's mind and other Democrats earlier in the year. Is there a risk that somehow this could, again, if it doesn't go down? I take your point that obviously the Republicans have a majority, and it's ultimately up to them whether that small number of holdouts. But is there a political risk here for Democrats? Either the risk that Chuck Schumer took last time, that he wasn't standing up firmly enough for Democratic values and principles, or that you get blamed somehow for any sort of political chaos or governing chaos that may follow.
There's always political risk, and I think there's certainly political risk here. I mean, Republicans have gotten blamed over the years for shutdowns because they're the ones who vote to shut down the government.
True.
And it's repeatedly Democrats who bail out Republicans when they're in charge to keep government open, even though when it's the other way around, and Democrats don't all agree on how to keep government open, we never get any help from Republicans. I have this quaint notion, Gerry, of just trying to do the right thing, like actually voting for what you believe in, and ultimately you'll get credit for that. Doesn't always work that way, but that's what I hope you'll see from Democrats in this fight, and then ultimately, then. I mean, it's not about playing to our advantage. I mean, it's just sort of sad that we have to have this brinksmanship about literally just keeping government open and talk about who's going to gain politically while the American people suffer. They're the ones who are not going to be able to go to the national parks. They're the ones who are going to see many people in their communities. There's this perception that government employees just work in Washington, D.C. Well, that's not true. I mean, there are hundreds of thousands of government employees all across America, who won't be able to bring a paycheck home if we shut down government. So there are a lot of risks that both parties take by playing this brinksmanship in Washington, because the polarization is so bad, the partisanship is so bad, that we can't just come together and agree on how to fund government and how to pay for it.
All right, let's talk about your party, the current state of your party and the future of it. Whatever Donald Trump's challenges,
can only be up from here, Gerry.
Well, exactly. That's the point. All these polls showing, it was the election last year was close. Everybody acknowledges that it was close in the presidential race. It was razor thin in the House. It was reasonably close in the Senate, and yet, here we are. Less than a year later, the Democrats seem to be held in very, very low esteem. You see these polling numbers of, people saying the very, very small numbers of people approving of the Democratic Party, Democratic registration falling dramatically in a number of key states in particular. What is the problem? What is the fundamental problem that the Democratic brand seems to be so toxic right now?
Well, first, it is true that the election was very close statistically, but this is the first time we've run against the convicted felon heading the other party. I don't think it should have been close. And I think when Democrats say it was close, in some ways it's an excuse for doing nothing to change. Oh, if we just tweaked a couple of things, we'd be fine. When, as you point out correctly, Democratic approval ratings have never been lower. And it's not just Republicans who don't like Democrats, it's Democrats who are frustrated with the party. And so we have to look ourselves in the mirror and say, what went wrong? And I think, one of the most insightful conversations I had before the last election was with a Marine I served with a little bit older than me, very well informed, proudly independent, votes Democrat and Republican. And he said, look, Seth, I don't want to vote for this guy. He's crazy. I mean, he used some other more colorful terms, but he said, you Democrats are just so out of touch. Okay, so if that's the perception, I think a lot of people feel that way. Why is that the case? Well, I think we've lost the trust of many American voters. Why? Well, look at some of the biggest issues in the country in the last couple of years. Immigration. A lot of Democrats said immigration wasn't a problem. Just look the other way. And we could see with our own eyes, even in northern cities, that it was a problem. Democrats, the administration, the Biden administration said that inflation wasn't a problem. Remember, it was transitory. I mean, go to someone who's having trouble paying their grocery bills in Ohio and say, oh, don't worry, this is just transitory. I mean, what the hell does that even mean, right? And then we said, don't look at George, don't look at the president. He's just fine. There's nothing to see here. He's perfectly ready to run for another 4 years, and people could see with their own eyes that wasn't true. So there are a lot of reasons why Americans just say, Democrats are just not being honest with us, and you're not leveling with us. And it was also an election where we saw that people wanted change, which is what President Trump, even though he had been a president before, he offered that change. It was a radical change. Maybe people weren't necessarily comfortable with exactly what he would do. But Kamala Harris got up there and said, oh, I'm just going to keep doing things the way Joe did. And it was a change election. It turns out that a lot of Americans are not happy with the status quo. So there's two things we have to do to address these two problems: the fact that we're not trusted, and the fact that we don't really have a plan to change the country. The first is we've got to regain that trust. We got to work hard to regain the trust of Americans. Stop preaching to them, stop saying, look, if you disagree with me, then you're not only wrong, but you're a bad person. I hear this all the time from fellow Democrats. Like, how could people vote for Trump? He's so terrible. Well, actually, why don't you listen to them? And they might explain, like my friend did, why he was considering voting for Trump. And then let's have a plan to actually make things better, not just oppose what the other side is doing. I ask fellow Democrats sometimes right now, do you oppose Trump's immigration policy? Of course, everyone does, right? I mean, what ICE is doing to, whisk people off the street with masked marauders going through our cities just because they write an op-ed that the administration disagrees with. I mean, this is horrific. It's un-American. I can say a lot of other things about it. But okay, what is Democrats' immigration policy? And fellow Democrats give me blank stares. Right. So we have to build a forward-looking agenda that actually deals with these problems. And there's a great opening here because Trump's agenda is all about change, but looking backwards. Let's go back to the way America was before, this sort of mythical view of the 1950s when everything was great. So Democrats have this real opening to say, no, we're going to go forward. We are actually going to help wages of the working class, which haven't gone up. We are actually going to help take on this threat of AI, which is sort of looming out there, and people know a lot of folks are going to lose their jobs. We have no idea how we're going to tackle this. Trump dismantled the Department of Education. We're not just going to rebuild it the way it was before. We're going to rebuild the Department of Education to prepare for this new economy. To take on and give opportunities to all the kids in my districts who really want to get vocational school and yet can't get slots in vocational schools because they got lines out the door. I mean, there's so much opportunity for Democrats here, but we got to reestablish that trust, and we've got to have a forward-looking agenda that's not just anti-Trump.
But it seems to me, Congressman, many people will agree with everything you've just said. But the party seems to be, you characterized it well, talking about immigration or the economy or some of these other issues. The party just has seemed to be, over the last few years, kind of on the other side of, dare I say, kind of common sense from where most people are. Immigration, of course, it was crazy that millions of people were able to come to this country illegally. These identity issues, where people are, Democrats seem to have been obsessed with elevating identity, race, gender, sexuality, whatever, the embrace of the trans, many of the sort of transgender ideas, or take an issue like crime. Again, we can argue, and I've got a lot of concerns with some of the things the president is doing to tackle crime in cities, but Democrats seem to be, even now with their condition in the polls and the problem that you diagnose, they come across as not being concerned about crime, not taking it seriously, and being more concerned I know about the issues of the presidential authority and whether or not the president's being too authoritarian. On all of these critical issues to Americans, the party seems to have adopted a position that just puts it, again, as you say, you quote your friend who is very skeptical of Trump, that just puts it, and the party doesn't seem to be willing to move away from the embrace of those positions that just seem to be so far away from where average Americans are.
Well, there's a real debate going on in the party right now. And there's a good group of us, I think, who really want to, have answers to these questions, to go back to being the party of the working class, go back to being the party that people look to trust, to being the party that looks out for the little guy, not just the billionaires who are benefiting so much from the big beautiful bill and all the new tax cuts for the richest Americans. I mean, get back to those roots, which, by the way, Gerry, does not mean abandoning our fight for minorities. I'm proud to be a part of the party that led the civil rights movement, that led the gay rights movement. So just people could marry whom they love, something that the majority of Americans now agree with. And we're going to stick up for trans people and make sure that they don't get fired because of who they are, or they get the health care that they need when Donald Trump just wants to hate them. But that can't be the only thing we do, right? Like, we can't just do that. We also have to show that we have a real agenda to bring down costs, because housing is out of control. Because in Massachusetts, people can't afford their electric bills just to simply pay for electricity, which should be just a basic thing that we all count on being able to get. A lot of people are going to have trouble paying their home heating bills this winter because energy costs are so high. So we need to have those issues be at the forefront, and we're still going to support these various groups that Donald Trump is just trying to politicize and attack. I'm proud to be in the party that embraces, all Americans, regardless of whom you love, or, what you like to do for a job, or where you came from. But we have to get answers to these big pressing questions that so many people are asking. And if we don't, then it seems like the only thing we prioritize are these social issues.
I'm here in New York City, and in a matter of weeks' time, we got an election for mayor where the Democratic candidate, just now recently endorsed by the Democratic governor of New York, Zoran Mamdani. Everybody knows about him. We don't need to go too much into his details. Self-described socialist, has some pretty extreme views. Won the Democratic primary by all measures, by all polling. Looks set to win the mayoralty of New York. It seems that is where a lot of the energy in the Democratic Party is, on that extreme left. Why are people, do you think, moving, lining up behind that, or coming out in great numbers to hear Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez or Bernie Sanders? What is it that's going on that momentum in the party seems to be towards even more extreme positions than the one that the Democrats campaigned on and lost last year?
I'm sure that's how it feels in New York City. That's a reality of New York City.
Okay, yes.
It's not how it feels in most parts of the country.
Maybe in Massachusetts, to be fair, parts of Massachusetts.
Parts of Massachusetts, but a lot of parts no. I've found that I have a lot of people coming up to me at town halls. I hold them regularly, and saying, "Hey, we want to win. We've got to put ourselves in a winning position here, not just in Massachusetts but across America." I mean, you talked about Mandavi, who's running for mayor and doing very well, talking about things like bringing down costs, but he's not a Democrat. He's a democratic socialist, right? I mean, he wants to have state-run grocery stores. I wish I could just transport him to Moscow 1985 and see how that was working, right? I don't agree with that. I don't know why. I don't know why Democrats are embracing those solutions, but I do know that Democrats hear these issues. Like, he is right when he talks about the unaffordability of housing and how we have to bring down costs, even though I don't think his solutions are actually going to work. I mean, he is right when he says that too much power goes to the elite. I mean, the throw a bone here to the hard right, the far right conservatives in America today, they're right to raise this Jeffrey Epstein issue, because it turns out that the elite just get away with things that the rest of us don't. And by the way, there are Democrats and Republicans, all elite, but Democrats and Republicans all wrapped up in that horrific scandal. So these are actual questions that Americans are right to ask. And I think Democrats as a party need to be better at addressing these, and not only let them be addressed by a Democratic socialist who's running for mayor of New York City.
Is there inevitably, when a party loses, as it did last year, there's a tremendous amount of soul searching and debate, as there should be in any democratic organization, capital D or small d. Of course, there's going to be debate. Is the party, though, going to be able to, coming up to midterm elections next year, going to be able to present? Is going to be able to unite around these ideas again? I just look and I see Zohran Mamdani, I see you, I see Bernie Sanders, or I see more moderate Democratic senators. It doesn't feel as though the party is moving towards a consensus, even as people genuinely and reasonably have very grave concerns about many things that Donald Trump is doing. That the party is not moving towards a clear consensus on what its opposition to Donald Trump should be. Is it going to campaign against Donald Trump being an authoritarian and doing things that a lot of people are very concerned about? Is it offering a positive message? Is it getting away from some of those, frankly, failed messages, those failed positions that the Democratic Party's had? What's your sense of just what kind of a unified set of ideas the Democratic Party is going to be able to offer next year?
Well, this may sound counterintuitive, but I actually think there's not enough debate, that we need to have more vigorous debate within the party about what our future is, because there's a whole segment of the party who just wants to keep things at the status quo, wants to just keep doing the same old thing. They're the ones who say, oh, we just barely lost the last election, we should just lay over and play dead and, just purely win off of opposition to Trump. That's not leadership. That's not what the American people want. That doesn't solve the problems that in many ways Trump is making worse with some of the legislation he's passed, reducing healthcare access to Americans, raising costs, dramatically exploding the deficit. Let's actually lead and have solutions to those problems. And that's going to require some debate to get there. When I hire people on my team, I always ask, what are you going to do if you disagree with me? And if they say, well, you're the boss, I'm going to get along, I'm just going to go along, if you don't get hired. Like, I want people who will disagree with me, who will challenge my assumptions. That's what we need to do as a party to actually come up with better solutions for the American people. So if we have that vigorous debate and we show the American people we're willing to do that, we're willing to eat some humble pie and say, yes, we lost trust with a lot of Americans, but we genuinely want to gain it back. We're going to work hard to earn your trust, and we're going to do it by actually trying to solve these problems. Then we will emerge with a serious agenda to move the country forward, not to take us backwards. But you're right, Gerry, that we're not there yet, and we've got some work to do.
Congressman Seth Moulton, Democrat of Massachusetts, thanks so much for joining Free Expression.
Hey, thanks so much for having me. Good to see you.
You too. That's all for this week. My first in vision with you, my first Free Expression. Thank you very much indeed, those of you who are watching. And of course, thank you to all for listening. Please do join us again next week when we'll have another episode. In the meantime, have a great week and speak to you then.